Hi, I'm Jakob. I'm the founder of Trax. Trax is a company that helps corporations and companies to measure CO2 on their transport operations. It's important to measure CO2 in all your operations of a company, like all steps when you produce a product, for instance. What all companies want to do right now, and they need to do, is to be able to say for every single chocolate bar they produce, how many grams of CO2 is allocated to that. And it's more difficult than you should think. You have a lot of operations inside the factory that's quite easy to understand, like how much electricity did we use, the internal cars that were driving back and forth. You can measure how much fuel did we buy to fuel these vehicles. But there's a lot of operations in scope 3. That's what we call scope 3. That's everything that's external. So the peanuts in your chocolate bar, how much CO2 did they take to grow, to get from the field to your factory? The chocolate in your chocolate bar, how did your employees go to work, and so on and so forth. And all of these operations, companies really just need to find ways to measure them. We have specialized. We only measure the transport part. But it flows together to the whole footprint so that the company at the end can make sense of what they're doing. I think that Trax can become a huge company. I think we have some very, very beautiful network effects. That means if a shipper, like a company that buys transport, that can be a company that produces something or a retailer. If a shipper wants to measure their CO2, they need to get the data from the vehicles that are driving out there, driving, sailing, flying. And so every time we get a customer on board that buys our measurements, they will ask everyone they buy their transport from to send us data. And every time we get people on board who send data to us, they're going to tell their shipper customer, hey, if you want to have a measurement of CO2, just buy a Trax product. So we have this flywheel effect. We already feel it right now. It's a quite nice feeling. I think success for me would be to show that I was right. I've always been very, very curious. I have an unfortunate tendency to just jump into something and say, oh, it should be possible. And I think my point of success doesn't really have to do with money, but it definitely has to do with, oh, I was right. Like some kind of saying, I did it, yes, I was curious, I tried, I tested it out, oh, look, I was right. I know I'm right, but I really want to show the world. So I think that's my own drive that makes me jump into these things. Life away from work, I've had this question very recently. So who is Jakob without Trax? And I unfortunately couldn't really answer at the moment. I'm happily married. I have very, very good friends. But if I had no work tomorrow, I wouldn't really know what to do until 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the evening where my friends also get off work. So I must admit my life is very much based on work, but also I've always been careful to take off weekends, so try not to work on weekends, of two reasons. First of all, I want to protect my dear husband and that he also has a husband, so not bringing work home in that sense. But secondly, I also think that if you stretch the bow too much all the time, there's no real you can't give it you're always on 120%. You cannot give more. So I try to be on 95% so that I can stretch to the last 5% if I need to. I think that what we do at Trax is kind of niche. So it's very difficult for people to understand the difficulty of creating a data infrastructure between carriers who sell transport and shippers who buy transport. That has had the effect that when I talk to family and friends, they know that I do something. It's probably cool. They see on LinkedIn that I talk to important people, but it's not a topic that goes into the mainstream media. It's not something that grandmas can understand. So no journalist would really interview me for these things. And I see it in the face of my husband sometimes when something big happens for Trax, when we have some very big talks with important people. He gets a little bit surprised, very proud, and a little bit surprised because that was what you were sitting and doing all the time. So I always try to especially to get my husband on board in the process that's happening, because he does see when I'm up and like there, it's a roller coaster. So he sees my ups and downs, and I'm trying always to just talk to him and make him understand what's happening. It can be small things, it can be big things, it can be small things on a global scale, but that's very big for me at that time. And I try to talk him and be very open and honest with it. I've always been very honest when people ask me how are you doing. It's always going to be the honest answer. So they sort of come along. But I've also recently noticed that there are snapshots. I have an acquaintance I only meet when I'm in investment rounds, and he thinks that I'm a very frustrated, angry person. And I have other friends, they only see me after the investment rounds. They think I'm the happiest person alive. So I'm trying to make sure that at least my husband and my nearest friends and family, that they know exactly which journey I'm on, and they can understand that it's not a constant. We at Trax started from the very beginning. It was literally in a garage. It was literally, one should actually see if it was possible that. So we started in this development phase where we were sort of the naughty professors sitting and making experiments. It was with zeros and ones, but it's still the whole feeling of it should be possible. We then came into a phase where we had invented something really important, but we needed to find out where did it fit. It's a little bit the screwdriver looking for the screw. So we were trying to find out what should the pricing be, who in the company should we talk to, how do we create a market? And now we've come to a point where we start growing, where we need to grow. In all these phases, there are different things you have to be good at. So there has been so many ups and downs the whole way through. I feel that I've had all the experiences a startup can have already. We have had a founder breakup in the beginning. I founded with another person who left within a year. That was very rough. I have had investors leaving just before we were signing the investment round, me not knowing what to do. I've had big firings. I've had 2 crises. The first was the Corona crisis. The second is the current one, which really is a crisis when you want to raise capital. So we've had a lot of ups and downs, and it is, sometimes I ask myself, is it worth it? Is it like, I know that the successful founder is the one who doesn't give up. But there is also a limit to when should you give up? And that has always been sort of my question to myself that I also ask loudly. Is it worth it? When is enough enough? So when it comes to founding, you need to be very good to yourself. It's a very important rule. You can read it in every book, and it's true. I would love to say, yes, I work out 3 times a week. I try to, but I often don't. I would like to say I only eat clean and I don't drink too much. That's also not always the truth. And I have my phases where I'm really, really clean, and I can really tell from my mental health that it goes very well. But there's one thing that I have done consistently from day one, and I can only say to anyone out there, do it. I've had a personal coach. I have different coaches over the different stages of the company, and it's fantastic because there are some things you can't do by yourself, some things you cannot solve with your friends or with your colleagues, just things where you can mirror, where you can talk about things. Because rule number 1 when you're a founder, be good to yourself. Be good to yourself. You could always have done it better, but it's not possible. You cannot redo what you have done. So just be good to yourself and say you did the best that you could at that time. To find the right coach is very difficult in one side, but on another side it's also kind of easy. So like if you have the feeling there is probably someone better out there, then it's difficult. Yeah, I've been very lucky with those I talked to, but I think I just had always a little thought in the back of my head that I also have when I hire people. If I feel a hell yeah, then that's it. If it needs to be a hell yeah. It's not it could be good enough. No, it needs to be someone where I say, yes, this is someone I could really spend time with. But I've been extremely lucky with my coaches. The biggest challenges in raising capital in the space that we're in is definitely that there is no real market yet. So we are in Europe, especially in Europe, we have a lot of, most capital is lucky enough that they can invest in things that you have seen before. So it's very, very difficult to come in and say, oh, you don't know it yet, but people will want to need to measure CO2 with precise data from in their transport, and they're going to pay a lot of money for it. Because the investors will say, I believe you, I believe the market will come, but I need to see when and how big the market's going to be. I need to see this, 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 and this. It's extremely difficult to look into the future in the financial industry because they, per definition, have to look into the past. So raising capital, early stage startup, in an industry that's one side high tech, but also has a software as a service element is extremely difficult. And then on top of that, B2B in an industry with enormously long sales cycles, it's hell. But, but you know, I mean, if it was easy, someone else would have done it. I think looking back on the rounds I've had until now, I had a principle of money doesn't smell. And it doesn't. It doesn't. Really, I have had really good and nice investors on board from day one. My problem was, the first investment we got was too little to succeed, too much to say no. And the problem for me was it was a corporate investor who had no strategic interest in us. So we started getting a lot of money, but we never got a follow-up investment from them. So getting the next investment where all the new investors say, hey, why doesn't he want to follow up? Is there something wrong with you? No, there's just a strategic change. That was sort of, I don't talk about mistakes, but it's a huge learning because the next round became okay, but again, we didn't get the super good investors who can get a follow-up investment. So the next round came along and none of the current investors wanted to be in the next round. So it's been very, very tough. I can say to anyone out there, if you can get a good investor who really have enough powder to really shoot the next round and next round and next round and lead the next round, that would be really the best. Otherwise, you're very alone all the way. If I should do a new startup tomorrow, my raising strategy would probably be, first of all, look which kind of startup it is. But if it's probably with me be something that's a little bit pre-market and a little bit and very much impact. So I would probably do a crowd fundraising, a real crowd investment. The reason why I'm saying that is you need a pre-seed and you need a big pre-seed. I have seen startups in the whole how do you call it, in the whole incubation world who have way too much money. They don't go well. But I've also now, I also have a startup right now who started with way too little money. That is also extremely hard. So you need to have this balance, enough money, a clear plan, and I would start by raising in a crowd investment environment. An alternative would be if I have a startup that has sort of, is walking the beaten path, so to speak. If someone has been there already, then I would go to a big investor, or I would go to find a co-founder who has a very strong network among investors, preferably someone who has made an investor rich already, because that is a really good way to get on. The thing is not so much what you happen in your pre-seed or in your seed round. The problem is when the rounds get bigger, you need to have a banker-like person who sits outside of your company who yells, hey, you guys should see, because the magic of the idea will disappear. It's gonna be like someone who can really push money into your company. And that comes very often with the pre-seed, it comes very often with a very good investor from the beginning. So that was my biggest learning when it comes to investments. I was very lucky that my first employee, that he later became my co-founder, that he's a fantastic guy to work with, and that we share integrity as our highest values. And that has helped the company very much. So he's a former professor of mathematics, a very, very skilled data architect, and a very good manager to the whole data team. And we work very closely together, and we have the same values. So the company's values sort of became a mixture of all values, and it's actually company values that we really like and we really love. And the best part of them is that we live them. We wake up in the morning and we just live the values because it's also our values. Those values are integrity, the ability to have real open discussions about things, and making sure that we always do the best for the environment and for the company. Having a very clearly defined company culture and having a company culture that stems from the founders has helped us a lot when we look for new employees. So we have a recruitment process. I've said until our 50th employee, both Igor, my co-founder, and I need to have looked them in the eyes. If they're not in our field of working, so if they're tech people, I don't want to judge them if they can do their work. I will say if I have the meeting with them, it's only going to be a cultural meeting and find out if they fit into the culture. We see curious people. I love curious people. It often has some very nice things that lies behind the curiosity. Because one of the most important rules of thumb I have when I hire people, they need to have something more than just the money to go for. I don't mind people who come in and say, I want to have this job because I want to be rich. But there should be a second thing. For me, it's curiosity. For some of the data scientists, it is the ability to get a lot of data and actually have real problems they can solve and not just having to do good marketing and sell more t-shirts. And for others, it's about saving the world. But for me, it's important that we have this broad group of people who have that in common, that they're curious and that they have a high level of integrity. So what's happening next for Trax, it's going to be really exciting. It's a crazy time right now for Trax. We have started an investment round. It got both scary because we're sort of running out of money, but also exciting because all the big players want to have a piece of us. And I honestly have no clue where we're going to land. Right now we have big investors and big companies fighting. Is it going to be an investment round, an M&A round? And right now, I feel a little bit like a chess piece where the big guys are talking. So I think the next thing that's going to happen for me the next month is I'm going to take back power and be sure that I can sort of like control this process and make sure that we're going to steer in and get investors who really want the same as we do. The process of going into the fundraising mode and really like just fight for this money and just really like go to the negotiations. And I hate negotiations. I like giving people things. I am really risk open, but only with risk that I can redo. I cannot redo if I signed something after an investment round. And they just scare me. Investment rounds are just super, super scary. What if I make a mistake? The funny thing is I come from this mode of being stressed, often angry at the world or the investors or the logic of the banking world. And then I have to slip into sort of like, oh, now we need to deliver. It's quite interesting. Every time we have had an investment round, every time it was finished, I took 2 weeks off, went somewhere else. No one could call me. I didn't care. And then I start working. The funny thing is that at the end of an investment round, or at the end, when you start signing, you often have no money. You often have a big problem that you have extremely much work, but not enough people to do it. So the first thing that happens is often you need to hire a lot of people. So what I do to myself is, after I have signed, I go somewhere else and sit and look into the air for 2 weeks, and then I can start working. You can find more about Trax on our webpage, www.trax.eco. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn, where we write a lot of things about CO2 measurement in transport, logistics, supply chain, and how we're going to solve all these problems that we have right now.